Welcome to the Grief Cocoon podcast, where you'll hear open, honest, and thoughtful conversations about grief and loss, death, and life. I'm Gaby, your host, and I speak to different creatives about their experiences, how they've used creativity to process and transform grief and loss, and how you can too. This podcast was recorded on the sacred and sovereign lands of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to offer my respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people listening today. In this episode, I speak to Zachary Phillips, who's a poet, author, mental health advocate, and mindset coach. In these roles, he's helped thousands of people move from surviving to passionately thriving. He's published 14 books, teaches online, and is the host of the Reality Check and Kinky Conversations podcasts. He's currently studying a Master of Counselling and offers mindset coach and mentoring. I met Zach at an in-person training session, and I instantly connected with him because he spoke about how he uses poetry as a way of processing his emotions. So we connected on that day, and I'm so happy that he is on the podcast and shares his story about his father, who he had quite a complicated relationship with. I really admire his courage and bravery in sharing his emotions and sharing his experiences online. And I think this is a really great conversation for men who are dealing with grief, but also anyone who has dealt with grief connected to estrangement or a complicated relationship with the person who's died. I start this podcast by asking Zach what his connection to grief is.
Honestly, my connection to grief, at least for the majority of my life, was to I don't feel, I don't connect, I don't feel pain. The people that died, I'm like, no, I don't want, like it was very dissociated, very absent, and it was, I felt like I didn't care. I felt like I didn't need to grieve, and really it was just what I'm realizing now more and more is that it's obviously it's a stifling, it's a pushing down, it's a denial, it's a fear of emotionality, and we can get into like the reasons down that path. But it was, with grief, but with every sort of intense emotion, it was like, no, I don't feel I'm strong. And it was just, putting it aside. Now it's changed, but like that's where it was. And out of fear of losing it effectively, and also not being sort of modeled or shown how to grieve. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking, like, is that, partly the conditioning, social conditioning as a guy, or if it's something else.
Yeah, look, everything's connected, right? So part of it would be, like it seems like the world's changing quite a lot. Like one of the things I try and do online is share, emotionality and all that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of people doing that now. But back in the day, it was sort of seen as, not manly, not right to sort of express, to share. It was sort of like there was, like slurs about it and that sort of stuff. But really, I don't think that was the case with me personally. Like that's definitely there, but it was more my response to the terrible parenting, mainly from my father, that forced me to sort of like, I moved out of home at 16. So it's like, to do that, I had to feel internally strong and like I didn't care about that situation. That's how I sort of justified it. And then getting through uni just by the skin of my teeth, like, no, like exams don't worry me, I'm fine, right? And it was just this just absolute survival thing. So it might have been a little bit of the social conditioning, and we can talk about that, but to me it was like a defense mechanism, survival process of just being like, no, I've got to survive, I've got to get through, I don't need to. It sort of became this like
Coping.
stepwise fashion. Yeah, coping.
I do notice that you do share a lot of your experience on social media. How did you go from, I guess, someone who you said was almost like fearful of your emotionality to then using a public facing kind of platform as a way to process? It seems like a big, a massive kind of leap. So like how did that journey unfold, like from being someone who might not want to share with anyone to that.
Dissociation helps. Sometimes I'll check into the fact of what I'm doing and it's like, holy shit. Um, um, but I guess like in a more serious note, like I don't, it sort of also doesn't bother me as well. So I see that there's a deep need in society to be real. One of the things I do, do a lot of sort of poetry and introspection on is the sort of vapid consumeristic high intensity dopamine hit nature of social media. It's all like very fake, very stylized, very not real. And people that are withdrawing into this space in themselves, and then they've got no one, or they don't feel like they've got anyone to turn to, so they turn to social media, and they're bombarded with an echo chamber that confirms their point of view, or they're shown people that are living, you know, beautiful, amazing, fake lives. Not fake, but it's like the highlight reel of their life, stylized, right? And it's like into that space, I'm like, okay, I can, because there is a part of me that's learnt to sort of put that aside. I can actually now harness that dissociation as a skill to be like, okay, I can put myself out there in a way that other people can't, and it can help people and it can help myself. And then as a way to, you know, to promote my work as well, like putting out my poetry and that sort of stuff. It's like, well, here's the real me, here's my real expression. So it's like a multifaceted thing, and it sort of happened. It happened stepwise. So like initially, I started writing as a way to process the issues with my father. I'm sure we'll get into that. But my first book was basically about me just expressing the most embarrassing, most traumatic instances for myself. And I shared it with a few friends, and they're like, you know, people will really resonate with this. Like you need to share this. So I did, and then people are like, they're like, yeah, like I've not lived your experience, but I've the thoughts that you're saying in response to your experience, I've felt, and it's helping me to help. And then it's sort of like, you know, that positive feedback loop of going, and now it's just sort of what I do.
And I guess having mentioned your father, yeah, would you mind sharing, I guess, your what
Yeah.
the story is there?
Well, look, he had issues when, like, this is, you sort of find things out after the fact, and we can talk about the grieving process down that path as well. But he had a lot of issues growing up. He was born in Australia, but his parents only taught him his original home language. So he went to school not speaking English. There was issues of trauma from, like, you know, people that came to the house. And he, you know, even back then, like, you know, with an ethnic community, very closed off. And he turned to drugs. Um, had me and my brother. My mother eventually had enough of supporting an addict that was just falling into his addictions, and they separated. But she thought it was in our best interests to keep the relationship open. Um, so there would be, you know, for a good 5, 10 years, we would be sort of sent to his house back and forwards, and he progressively, you know, lost himself to addiction, to drug dealing, to you know, like, have you know the show Hoarders, like how the people just sort of like, you know, it's just untreated mental illness, um, which I have a lot of sympathy for now, but in the time it was an embarrassing, scary nightmare that, you know, one of the reasons why I ended up moving out of home, it was my home life at my mum's wasn't great. I couldn't fathom, you know, he couldn't look after me, let alone himself. So I moved out of home pretty early at 16, and then sort of went from there. And towards the end of his life, I think I was maybe 23, and maybe about a year before he passed, I sort of started, like, with a bit of time from the relationship, started to try and like get something back. But it was too little, too late, and I was also still quite naive. You know, it's sort of like that thing of like, I wish, you know, if I could speak to him now, there'd be more questions. Um, and since his passing, I've discovered more stuff about him, because he was very sort of withdrawn, you know, due to the drugs, due to the mental illness. And my memory of most things is quite scattered. I don't have a good, like, memory of personal events. I'm good with facts. I'm good with stuff I've read, but my personal memory, and apparently that's pretty common from a trauma perspective. So I don't have very many memories of him, other than this sort of doped up person sitting on the couch, letting us sort of be there. Um, so yeah, we can
Mm.
go. Feel free to go down any path you like from there.
Mm. Actually, I was wondering, like, whether for you, whether you do see a separate a difference between grief and trauma, like, because I guess there is definitely overlap, but for you, are they distinctly different, or are they kind of the same thing in your experience?
A friend of mine, like 3 days ago, said to me, "It's not the action, it's not the thing really that causes trauma. It's the lack of being seen about the trauma that matters." If that makes sense, and like that sort of hit real hard to me. It's sort of reframing a lot of things. So there is trauma distinct, definitely distinct from grief, but there is definitely an interlinking because like I can't ask him from a safe adult grown up perspective. Like I'm a dad now, and there's a lot of like sort of backwards learning of like, oh shit, like, there's times that I've lost it with my kids in terms of like being unwell mentally. I'm going through a process of medication that's caused me to be catatonic for a while, right? So it's like there's things that I would like to know. So there is definitely interlinking, but there's definitely things that are separate as well.
Mm. And do you think that your, I guess your the mental health stuff that you went through, that it's kind of very like stems from that time in your life of not being looked after, and yeah, I guess how has the relationship with your dad, and I guess it's sort of a form of disenfranchised grief because it's kind of a little bit obscure, like it's a little bit hard to pinpoint, but there's like a lot of things that are involved in that.
Neglect is different to abuse, right? Neglect is like an absence. So it's like I'm constantly discovering things that I didn't have, that I didn't even know existed. And it's like, oh shit. So like I'll just go on a tangent, so feel free to pull me back. But like just last night, my son was having an issue, and then basically like just like an argument. He's 6 and trying to get him to go to bed, right? But then I realized halfway through, like I was doing something wrong. I was, a bit emotional, and I sort of expressed to him that fact. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, yada yada, going down that path, just showing him I'm human. It's like, oh shit, I never saw that. I was never given that. Like, and that's just one little instance of like, and it really calmed him down. It showed him it's like, oh, he was putting it all on himself, and I'm like, hey, like, okay, like fair, but also like I'm at fault. I've done things wrong. I make mistakes. Once again, that was never shown, and it was sort of like, okay, it's seeing that again and again and again and again. And how do you find and fill the holes that you don't even know exist? I think I've gone off topic a little bit, but
No, no.
it's yeah, it's this constant discovery thing. And the more like the older I get, it's like, oh, there's another thing, oh, there's another thing, oh, there's another thing. And it's fucking crushing because it's like you've got this weight of, I don't know. It's like I feel like I have to hold up myself and my memory of him. I don't know. It's very complex inside inside the mind, you know.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, like, because I can understand, like, what you're saying is like you keep discovering new things that you missed out on or that you didn't get when you were younger from your father. And so, like, I guess, how do you continue to, I guess it's sort of you find new things that you need to process in a way. So, like, does that kind of make it hard to keep moving forward when you're also being dragged back in a way by those new realizations?
Yeah, yeah. Look, at this stage, it's almost comical. Like it's like, oh, here's another thing, which is good, a good response now. Um, because yeah, it's just like just at every turn, it's like, oh, here's another thing, and it's a constant thing. And my partner, different but similar sort of issues, and it's like we've just constantly realizing like we need to be stronger than we've ever had modeled, just beyond strong, beyond anything that we've had ever shown to us. Like we need to be that thing for ourselves and therefore for our kids. And it's trying to do like, and yeah, like what I'm doing with the online stuff with books and all the things I'm doing. I haven't had that modeled. Right. So and
Yeah.
that's hard because it's like without, you know, even just doing a podcast, right? Like just anything that I'm doing, there's no there's no modeling. And
Mm.
it's like I know what not to do, but I don't know what to do necessarily. It's about finding my own models for that and
Mm.
heading towards a path that I've set. But once again, even setting a goal, like what does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to be right? What does it mean to be ethical? What does a good life look like? All of these questions weren't I never had someone to had a father figure to bounce that off and be like, hey, so now I'm sort of just like it's not only where am I going, it's like what is the best mechanism to get there? Is it financial benefit? Is it being a good moral, ethical, religious person? Is it friendship? Like what is the measure of success that I should aim? Like I don't even have that. So it's sort of like all
Yeah.
of these questions. It's not only where am I going, it's how am I going to get there and why am I going there? And it feels like I'm sort of drifting or floating or being blown by the wind often. And
Mm.
I'm sort of working on having a solid base. It's like, okay, this is what I am. This is what I believe. From that point, I'm going to move. But finding that solid point of myself with trauma is hard because it's like that solid point shifts, you know?
Mm. Yeah. And I just remembered, like, I did an interview with someone who she lost her mom at 9 years old. And it's a
Mm,
different thing, but like she also, I guess, grew up, she just didn't have a mother, her mother
yeah.
there. And so as she got older, like as an adult, she was trying to get, I guess, find a mother in older women that she meets,
Mm.
in her life. And I was just wanting to ask you, like, whether that was something that you found that, because you didn't have that role model in your dad, like, did you seek that out in other men that you met, or did you look for it in other places, and maybe even in places that, or in people that weren't great role models, but, you kind
Yeah.
of, were you grasping for that?
100%. Like it's latching on to people in a way that's like, okay, I need to I need to find things in my life that I want to become or be. So like I'll answer it backwards. Now times I'm looking at myself going, okay, what didn't I get? What don't I have? And it might be discipline in my life. So there'll be people online, podcasters, personalities that I'm like, okay, I need to instill this person into my brain. So I'm actively hunting it now to sort of
Mm.
fill those gaps. But yeah, in the past it would be looking at people and going and just sort of like latching onto them as like as an older male role model and then inevitably being let down because they're not my father and everyone's flawed and yeah it's taken a lot to recognize that. And then I'll also now even sort of see myself doing that. I'll see myself seeing people and going this innate wanting to just latch on, um
Mm.
because it's like oh, like maybe they can validate me, maybe they can tell me, need someone to tell me I'm a good boy, that I've done well, like that I'm, I want to be seen. And,
Mm.
back to the question about putting myself out there on social media. Part of it is like a need to be seen, acknowledged. Oh, look at my art. Look at my art, Dad. He was an artist, right? There's a lot
Mm.
that I see in my life that I've done and I do that was inspired by the little tiny little shreds of attention that I got. It's sort of, I've sort of taken it and run with it. But it's like, how much of that is me? How much of it would have happened? And how much of it is like this grasping?
Mm. And was there a point where, I guess, like, because sometimes we experience things that are traumatic when we're younger, and we feel things, but we don't necessarily, like, we might not recognize it as grief, or, for what it is. And so was there a point, like, how did you recognize or realize that you were grieving the things that you missed out on, or that you didn't get from your dad? Or, was there a point where you realized that, or maybe that you weren't conscious that it was grief, and then at some point you kind of, it hit you?
The the older my kids get, the more apparent it becomes. Because because now it's like I'm seeing what I'm doing with my kids. It's like, oh, like almost every day it's like, this is something I didn't get. This is something that I didn't receive. This is something that I didn't have. And the problem with that is it's like it just keeps happening, and it just keeps coming up. There's, earlier on, like I said, I sort of pulled away and sort of blocked off. So I was sort of like very unaware of what I was feeling of myself and also what I was feeling
Mm.
of the world. Whereas now it's like, okay, now I can see the problem. Now I can hear the problem. Now I know the problem, and I'm starting to see those problems. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is just another thing. This is just another thing. This is just another thing. It just keeps coming.
Mm. And how did you, I guess it sounds like, you've done a lot of work and you've gained a certain level of like self-awareness, obviously, with what kind of helps you through that? Like, have you done therapy, or was there certain tools that you've found that have kind of helped you along the way?
Yeah, like constant talking therapy. Finding a psychologist that's good, that understands, is important. I've been through quite a few, and a lot of them are unfortunately not as professional as they could be, or not as recognizing as they could be. But I found one that's really good. Very much suggest that for most everyone. Um, Having routines in place so that, like, you set my morning up for later on success is good. And
Mm.
meditation, just sitting in silence and just letting my brain just be. One of the things that I sort of am not a fan of about modern society is how noisy it is. You can watch a video, listen to a podcast, listen to music, and you can bombard your brain with constant noise forever. You go to the shop, you're consuming calories. You can, you know, alcohol and drugs are readily, but like it's constant,
Mm.
which is great in one sense, but it also doesn't let anything process, and you'll find yourself sort of running. I found, like, I say you, but it's like I found myself just sort of avoiding everything. Um, but just giving myself some time daily to just let the inbox clear out,
Mm.
for lack of a better expression, is all of those things have helped. Um, and then I guess just separate to that, like an introspection of like asking those questions of myself. What does it mean to be a good person? What does a good life mean? What should I be doing? What didn't I like about my childhood, my father, etc.? And what did I like? What can I, and sort of just actively asking those questions.
Mm.
And then I guess just any gaps that I see, try and fill it with formal or informal education.
Mm. So like self-education to learn more about what
Yeah.
you're going through, or
Well, bit of everything. Like
yeah.
looking into yeah, self-education around complex trauma, around mental health. I'm
Mm.
currently I've just started a Masters of Counselling, which I'm just in my first unit, but it's already helping me, see things in myself. For example, like, just read a chapter last night. I was talking about the benefit benefits of anger, of expressing anger,
Mm.
and that's something that I've closed off a lot to myself. It's like, raised in with my mum, like, I'm with my kids, I let them get expressed, be sort of, rough and tumble play. But if that's a bit restricted, and society sort of quashes anger, and it's like no, we can express it in a healthy way, and I'm sort of learning
Mm.
to open up and to express that.
Mm.
does that sort
Actually,
of does that sort of yeah.
yeah, talking about anger, like that must have been a big kind of something that you did feel, is that something you felt like towards your dad, or
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah, like, just I've got over beside me, I've got drawers full of rage filled scribbles that will never see the light of day, um,
Mm.
of me, like, what I would have said to him, were like, I never, like, one of the regrets I have is that I never confronted him directly about his addictions or how he treated us. I never sort of, like, screamed at his face
Mm.
and sort of gave him a piece of my mind. And like that's like there's a few things that I regret. One of them is that. Um, and I suppose conversely, the other one is I regret not getting high with him as well, like going both ways. It's like, I don't, it's which is weird to me because like, that's a more like a later on thing after I've, experimented and used drugs. It's like I would love to have had both of those experiences of given him a piece of my mind and been like, hey, like real talk here. What the hell are you? What are you thinking?
Mm.
Because yeah, there's a lot of rage, a lot of anger there, and a lot of unexpressed stuff. And yeah, I guess I look back at. You look. Have you done the idea of like looking back at the music you listen to and just like like reading the lyrics, not singing along, but like reading through the lyrics of the songs that you listened to back in the day. Like
Yeah.
there's so much to be said there that it's like oh, I was far more angrier than I even realized. And I look back at the songs now and like I can't listen to it.
Mm.
It's too much.
Yeah. No, I used to be very drawn to sort of very sad music, like
Yeah.
just emo music and
Oh yeah.
um yeah, and I don't listen to it as much today. But even the fun music, like now when I look into it, I was like, well, that's just like not right, when you go
Mm.
through. But yeah, it's just I think yeah, the music actually can tell you a lot about like what you're going through,
Mm.
what you're listening to.
It's definitely an insight, and it's one of these things. It's like I'm going to be listening to my son's music, looking up the lyrics very closely to see how they're going.
Yeah, and how has it been? So like, I guess, did you feel that before becoming a father that he was like a big, was that a big, was that a big point in your grief that you realized like it was a big kind of thing that was about to happen that you might not be as prepared for had you had a loving, caring father, or
Oh,
has it been?
def
Yeah.
definitely, yeah. I mean, like, well, for one, he didn't live long enough to see the kids, so I don't have like the actual support of a father.
Hmm.
But beyond that, I was like terrified because it's like, well, the role model that I have was atrocious, and I can see, I'm living the impact of having him. So, like I said before, it's like I knew what not to do, but
Hmm.
that's not a way to live, like knowing what not to be or not to do is it's just that's just another form of running from trauma, and it's like I'm running from myself. One of the things that I'm realizing about myself is a lack of self-trust, a lack of belief in myself. I'll do things and I'll sort of persist, but there's this last 10% that I don't quite back that I don't quite know. And I think it's because of not having, not having a positive
Hmm.
father figure in my life, being like, oh, okay, I don't know where I'm gonna be. And yeah, it's like I wish I had that. And yeah, becoming a father was quite eye-opening because it's like, oh shit, okay, uh it's on me now. I am the father, and it's very easy to like try and put that blame back, 30 years ago, but now my kids are looking at me and now they're seeing me, and they're imprinting off me. It's on me. Whew,
Hmm.
scary.
Yeah, it's a big kind of responsibility, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess how has it been like with your partner? Have you been able to, I guess it sounds like you have been pretty like open about things, and have they been able to provide that support along the way, or how have you navigated that like in your relationship?
Yeah, no, she's very supportive, very understanding, and someone that I can actually open up and talk to and express and come to. And she's helped me, through. She was there before he passed, and then during the passing, and then after the passing. So she's seen that sort of journey. So she met him and sort of saw him towards the end. Um, when I was sort of rekindling that relationship a little bit. But yeah, she's helped, and like I mean, like attracts like we've both got issues, different but similar issues of stuff going on with our home lives and that sort of stuff. So she sort of gets it sort of from a lived experience. Whereas, you know, you speak to people that don't have a similar lived experience and they don't quite understand the nuance, like the nuances of neglect are very, you know, like I'll discover a thing and I'll tell her, she's like, oh my God, you know, and vice versa. it's yeah, we sort of both discover that.
And so I just wanted to shift to your use of writing and how you discovered the power of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when did you first try it or come across, you know, creative writing and
It
start to?
it was like, yeah, once it was from my partner actually. She is a poet. And she was the first person to show me a poem that I connected with. My experience at school, I was very left brain thinker, very math based. It made sense, you know, in a chaotic world. It's like math makes sense. There is a right and a wrong answer. There's a process. We got this. Whereas English literature, all of that sort of stuff was very. It felt very airy fairy. It felt very fluff, very interpreting, and it is. And what I realize now is that that was me, you know, like running from my emotions because it's like, oh, don't want to engage there at all. Let's go back to math. Um, but she showed me some poetry that she had written that sort of just it just resonated with me, and I was like, okay, there is something here. And then I started looking into it, and then I ended up writing that first book because I just my dad passed, and I just had to get this out. And you know, like I say to people, like the page listens, it doesn't judge, it's free, it's always available, it's the perfect therapist. You can discard it, but it has the perfect memory. You know, it's there. And if you think about what talking therapy is you expressing yourself to someone that's listening and just giving those minimal encourages back and being like, yeah, you know, the page does that for you. But the good thing about the page is that it's not a person, as in like no matter how good a relationship I have with my therapist, they're still a person. They're still judging. They're still, you know, a real entity. Whereas the paper is there, and I can, you know, it's not, it's inanimate. It's not a thing, right? The the other thing is that you can sort of look back on it and see what you wrote. So like that idea of like this too shall pass. Like I can say like I'm feeling this way or this is truth, and then I look at that in a week, a month, a year. And it's like no, well that was truth, but I am me now, and you see the process. So it's sort of like I discovered it. Sort of yeah, my partner sort of woke up the idea of poetry. I got a lot of therapy from writing my first book, and then it just became this once again that feedback loop of like, oh, this is good. And then once you start sharing, people start saying that what you're doing is hitting home and resonating. Like that feels good. It feels good to have people say to me, you're expressing thoughts or moods or emotions that I only barely knew I was feeling, but once I read your work, it's something clicked and it resonated. And there's like that feeling is addictive. I'm not gonna lie, it feels good to have. Well, it is. It's like, you know, it's like people resonating with art. It's good and it can help. And then I can say like, hey, this is like one of the things I do with people now is take them through a process of writing therapy. Like, well, take them through that process of pulling that out of them and giving them that tool of like, yeah, like, you know, anyone can do it. You can just start writing, but having someone facilitate that process, it's sort of like I'm coming full circle. It's like I want to give the world the ability to write, and part of sort of why I share all of what I do is because it's like here's a tool, here's meditation, here's writing, here's the encouragement to see a therapist, here's the encouragement to express. Maybe I can find some benefit back from there, you know.
Yeah, and how, I guess, do you use writing purely to process your experiences, or have you, since writing the first book and going through that process, have you kind of broadened the subject?
A lot of what I write is just a form of expression, but now I'm trying to turn that into artistry. Like I'm trying to make art as well as, you know, using the expression. But the thing is like good art comes from expression. So it's sort of tied in, but a lot of it is still me just expressing. But now I'm sort of playing with the idea of making more art. I'm doing. Have you familiar with the AI generated artworks that are coming out?
Yeah.
So I'm playing with that and putting my poetry over the top, and I'm like this is the next project I'm doing. Is going to be sort of playing with this idea of, you know, my poetry over the top of art, and it's beautiful, and I'm loving that process. I'm loving the idea of making something more than just me. And the idea is that it'll still be, each poem will still be, my expression, but I will put the art to make it beautiful and then put that into a story itself. So it's sort of like
Mm.
each piece is the expression, but collectively it will be sort of a deeper form of artwork. But I mean, like no matter what you do, it's all still has to come from you, right?
Well, I mean, with AI,
Yeah, well,
my,
yeah, look, but you're the one that's
yeah,
with the AI. You're the one that is prompting,
inputting. Yeah.
inputting, and
Mm.
choosing. And then with what I'm doing, I'm choosing like how the words are arranged, what words to go on, and how to go it in. I
Mm.
understand there is the ethical issue around the AI art, but it's taking over the world. It's not going away. And it's
Mm.
like the artist, the ethicist in me worries about it, but the artist in me looks at it as another way that like now I have access to visual expression that I didn't have
Mm.
before.
Mm.
And in the same way, like I can look up on Google information that I didn't have before that it just takes and gives me for free. It's the ethics are a bit funny, but the artist in me is like, screw it, let's make good art. Let's make something that will, like let's make something that people will resonate with.
Yeah. And what have you found to be like, what do you think it is about writing and about art making that, I guess, helps you process things? Like, what do you think is the,
Why write
yeah,
effectively?
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like it's your thoughts are chaotically bouncing in your head, right? Like you just sort of it's this loop, this circle, this cloud. If you can understand it and express it, like there's a bunch of quotes from famous writers of like, I write to know how I feel, and it's
Mm.
true. It's like I've been going through the process of different medications, and it's been atrocious. It's not working with me. But I've written poetry during, before and after and during, and it's like, okay, now I can see how I feel about that. And
Mm.
my experience on the medication has not been good. It's turned me apathetic. It's turned me to taking away meaning. And I've written some really good poetry whilst in that state of mind. It's like, okay, that's how I'm feeling right now. And I see it on the page and it becomes clear. You know what I mean?
Mm.
It's a matter of like, we think like a million thoughts. I don't know what the stats are, but it's like you're thinking things constantly. But if you can sort of distill that and purify it, it's like, okay, this is how I think on this topic. This is how I think about
Mm.
myself. This is how I am thinking about the world. And that sort of gives you the ability to look at things and go, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And
Yeah, I
that's
think,
that's
yeah.
powerful.
So it's sort of, which I've found as well, that it gives you insight into what you're actually experiencing and what you're thinking and feeling.
Yeah, the it's a form of introspection. I mean, you can ask
Mm.
yourself a question like, if you play through the process of like, what am I feeling right now, and just free write what comes up, and you'll list a few things, and then something in there will trigger, and you'll be like, oh, this is, like I didn't realize. Like I was working with a guy, and he, this he didn't realize that he felt emasculated. He was sort of grieving the loss of a partner, not a loss of like a ending of a relationship
Mm.
rather, and he felt emasculated, and he wasn't aware that that was there. And then we sort of dug into that process, and it sort of pulled it to this long edge, and it was like this feeling of emasculation
Mm.
because she'd moved on and he hadn't, and like that was sitting there causing a lot of anger. But once he was aware of that, once it sort of the light of awareness looked at that emotion, he could now see it, and he could see the impact of it. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling this emasculation, fair enough, but now I'm not, he's not as irritatedly, angrily lashing out at people for some reason. He can look at it and go, okay, and the same thing with, that's just the example that came to mind. But
Mm.
if you're feeling grief, that's, a lot of my writing is obviously like, a response to my father. Like I've written poetry about that. It's like, oh, there's a lot of unresolved emotionality here. It's a way of seeing that emotion, a way of expressing that emotion, and a way of healing from the
Mm.
emotion. It's sort of like this complete package. So it's like, right. I just encourage people to write, in conjunction with therapy, maybe medication if you need it, meditate, like, do all of the things, but also do writing.
Yeah. And actually, might be bouncing around a little bit, but just the idea of, I guess, if someone has a partner that also kind of didn't have a good father figure or lost their dad, or is going through, because I feel like I've met quite a few, and I even worked with quite a few young men as well, who didn't have a father figure, and I think, and I've also been with someone who didn't have a father figure or didn't have a close relationship with him. So I think it really does impact a lot of men growing up, and feeling a bit, I guess, almost like feeling a bit lost,
Mm.
without that kind
Yeah.
of guidance. And
Mm.
do you have any suggestions for, if someone is with someone or knows someone that is in that situation where, or even they, I guess sometimes, the person might not recognize that the
I
reasons. Yeah.
yeah, I see you circling a thing. I would suggest that like people find like substitutes in some capacity for what they don't have, right? Like if you don't have a father figure, you might need to find like a coach, like a teacher, a uncle, a grandpa figure, a male friend, someone that can, or a few, someone that can fit that gap. Like, I've trained martial arts my whole life, and the coaching figure is, I think, is a substitute for a lot of the guys their father,
Mm.
because this guy's like he's consistent. You go there, he's always there. He talks to you, he's teaching you something, and we're instilling this sort of like manly environment. And like I don't mean that from like a misogynistic perspective, but
Mm.
like, like I go there to learn how to fight. Like that's a pretty, masculine, you know, females train as well. That's neither here nor there, but it's like we're learning,
Mm.
it's a positive expression of masculinity that I wouldn't be exposed to, I wasn't exposed to from just my mother, right?
Yeah.
That might be football, it might be, there's a whole variety, like in, like your version of whatever that expression is.
Mm.
And same thing, if you don't have a mother figure in your life, there'll be parts of things that you need to, fill the gap there. Um, and like the gender could be split. This isn't even a gender topic. It's more like there's different aspects of being a human that you need to fill. And if you don't have those filled, find ways. And if you're helping someone else, it's like, hey, have you considered doing this? Like, and just and sort of like go around. It doesn't have to be as cliche as the martial arts example, perhaps, or the football example, but like, so for me, I'm thinking of doing like poetry nights, going and expressing with, guys and girls, just to just free speak, because that aspect isn't being hit in my life anymore. And this is more going into like just life in general, I guess. But it's like, oh, I would love to be able to just free express, just off the top of my head, fill that gap. And if you have a partner or a younger relative, help them to find, go with them, or like take them there, like support them in that. You might not enjoy the martial arts, for example, it might not be your thing, but support them in their discovery of their thing.
Mm.
Yeah, I would also suggest, like, I don't know, like for me, when I lost my father, even though like we didn't have the best relationship, it still hit and it hurt and it was
Mm.
confusing, all of that sort of stuff. Some people were like, did the sort of typical like, okay, just get back into it and just sort of just push through, and that really didn't resonate at the time. I would have I would have liked to have heard people say to me just like, yeah, like take some time. Like it's okay to take time. It's okay to take a lot of time if you need. That wasn't sort of given to me. And like the hyper masculine response of like just push through, keep training, do like that really didn't help. And it sort of pulled me away from a few people and things in my life, which looking back at, I sort of threw everything out, but I was grieving and I didn't realize I was. And I sort of was like, oh, you didn't give me the right answer, so screw you. And I sort of turned away, which had sort of down the line sort of social implications that, now I don't see a lot of those people anymore, which sucks. But like, I would have liked the response. And my response now, if I know someone has passed, is and would be to be like, yeah, like, even if like someone loses a pet, like it's a lot
Mm.
less extreme. But like, I lost a pet that I really loved, and it hurt. And unless you've lost a pet, and probably lost a pet recently, right? Like, because these, I don't know, I found like you get over it and you get a new pet, and like the cat replaces the cat. Well, it sounds a little bit callous, but um, there's a grieving process there that, until I lost that pet that I loved, I didn't even realize existed. It's sort of
Mm.
like, and now it's like, yeah, like, so, a friend lost their pet and I was trying to be like, it's actually a big thing. Like this sucks, take your time.
Yeah.
It's
So
okay. Yeah, talk about it.
yeah, well, pets can become part of the family. So
No,
yeah,
exactly. It
yeah.
sounds callous. Yeah, because they are just an animal, but they are like, yeah, like you're with this thing every day. Like just because they're not humans, you still form an attachment and a bond. That's why they're in our life.
Mm.
But
Yeah. But no, it was, I guess, with you're talking about like, being acknowledged for what you're going through, because I think with
mm,
I think sometimes if someone didn't have a good relationship with the person that they lost, people might downplay it and say, oh, well, they didn't really they weren't close, so, and then,
yeah,
yeah, and then just
yeah.
assume that,
Well, this is
assume
the
that,
thing, like,
mm,
whether or not like if you're super close and like your best buddies, like my dad's my best friend, and we're always out together, like that's going to hit in a different way, right? But like the loss of my father, it was quite. This is going to sound like harsh, but it was like I needed it to happen to be able to grow, which sounds terrible, but also him passing stopped every future development of the relationship, if that makes sense. Like it's sort of like it was like a very, very clear ending of a chapter. So now, like, I wish I could have said and done all of these things with him. I can't now. But because he was gone and this sort of open wound of trauma was no longer there, like that's in the past. Like I don't have to see him, like, because the other thing was just like it was very embarrassing and like sort of like a lot of shame. Like I would see him and he would be and smell and act like a homeless person, like a bum. Like he literally stank.
mm,
Like it was I couldn't be in a car with him due to the smell. Like it was terrible, right? And like there's a lot of like this is my father. Like it was very much
mm,
shame. Like there was a lot of shame. Like can't have a job, always on job. Like so like that was always this constant opened thing. Every time I saw him, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. Like you are this pathetic, worthless man. Like that's how I felt at the time. Who doesn't have his shit together.
mm.
So when he passed, it's like, yeah, I don't have to deal with that anymore. But it's like all of those questions, all of that potential, like it's a different form of grieving, and it's not traditional. It's not what you would consider like that. And it's like now there is no chance to reconcile. There is no chance to connect, and it's sort of like, yeah, it's just different, and it takes it takes different responses, or at least it still takes time. I can only speak to
Yeah.
my own truth, but yeah, it's hard.
Hmm. And it sounds like writing, I guess, because there would be a lot of words unsaid, a lot of experiences that you didn't get to have, or and writing, was that a way to express all of that stuff, like write down all the things that you wanted to say that you couldn't, all the anger? Has that been a major part of your writing?
It comes like the writing process for me is just like something will come to me, and it's like,
Mm.
okay, like a poem, and I'll capture it, and if I capture it and express it, it's sort of like I understand a bit more about myself, and it's sort of like it wants to be written. There's a few different, like this is sort of going to creative, I don't know, theory or expression, but like poetry seems to be me being like a capturing thing. This thought
Hmm.
comes through, and it's like it's screaming to be written, and if you don't grab it, it just goes, and it's like you've lost it. Whereas the longer form stuff is you're sort of more sort of like hunting for it. So if there is something, like there'll be times that I'm like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on here, so I will write something down, and that's me sort of actively doing writing therapy, for lack of a better expression,
Hmm.
and that helps. But because I've sort of turned writing into like a career now, I'm always sort of writing different stuff, so it's sort of become like a thing of like this is just another way to express, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But initially, at least, it's like this was a tool. I'm feeling bad. I don't like how I'm feeling. I'm going to express it.
Hmm.
Um, it
Okay.
was more
And
formalized. And now it's just like I just write all the time.
yeah. And do you have, I guess, just to finish up, like, is there one tip or thing that you would suggest for people who might want to start using writing as a processing tool?
Just write. It's the most cliche advice, but what I would suggest if you're struggling, this is the basic process. And I want to read you a poem at the end of this, just to like just tie it up, just a simple poem about my father about mourning. It's sort of tie the knot. But what I would suggest is give yourself 20 minutes time to yourself. Get a pen and a page or like a phone or some sort of way that you can write. Doesn't matter how, but if you're using tech, turn off, notifications and internet and stuff. So you just literally just got your notes out and just start expressing what you're feeling on the surface, like the top of the iceberg. Just 1 minute, just write down the thoughts. Bop, 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 bop. No judgment, no filter, just write. And then have a look through that. Have a look through those thoughts, and that one will jump out at you. And just think on that. More thoughts will come, start expressing that. And just keep coming and just sort of get it out there. We're priming the pump, we're pulling it out of you. And you'll have this sort of thing, and you'll start discovering truths about yourself. And you might be, like I said, the person feeling emasculated. You might realize, oh shit, there's anger, there's grief, there's whatever, there's something in here that, it might be a thought about yourself, about the whatever. Once you've got that, dig into that thought more. And then if you can, this might take a few sessions. You might get in a flow. You might turn that into a poem. And what the poem, turning it into a poem does is it's distilling that feeling. That, like, if we're talking grief, it's like you're like, this is my expression of grief in this moment. And the act of turning it into a poem is like you're taking away all the superfluous words, and you're presenting this piece, you're turning it into art. And the act of turning it into art, you've worked out what you're feeling, you've expressed it fully, and then you're sort of getting away all of the stuff, and it's like, here's a piece of emotionality. And that process helps you to not only heal and express, but it also gives the world, if you choose to share it, you don't have to share it, but it can give the world a stepping point, or like a point of reference. It's like, this is an expression of grief, even just to yourself. And you look at it and go, okay, this is like raw emotionality, this is beauty, and you can see it and go, okay. And then from there, the next time you write, it'll just be this like sort of emptying of the inbox and just leaving you with, like, I don't know, there's a lot of like different symbolisms that you could go for, but it's healing. And it's sort of like, like enough pressure turns the carbon into a diamond sort of thing. It's like you're sort of going through that process, and it's like, oh, I've turned my grief into beauty. And like the poem might be like tear inducing, like it might, like, but that's it's moving. Like you're aiming to move someone. You know what I mean?
And I think I tend to say a lot of people cry when I share my own stuff, and I think it's a good thing when people cry, because it's an emotional release.
Cathartic. It's beautiful, and that's exactly it. And like, yeah, if you find yourself crying whilst writing, good. Like if you like what's the goal? If your goal is to make poetry and art, then there's like a extra few bits that you want to be doing. But if your goal is to heal and you start writing and you have to stop because you're crying, you win. You've done it. You've done the thing.
Yeah.
The only suggestion I would say is make sure that if you do go down this process, you have supports in place, because you're actively turning the lens in, and it can be a little bit, I don't want to say dangerous, but confronting. And, at least like, and for some people it can be dangerous, because you are sort of purposely unpicking some potentially, there might be a lot of things that are blocked. And once you start, you're sort of opening that up. And like, I've written, I think 14 books now. Like it's an addiction. Like it's healing, but it can open you up to confronting memories and thoughts and emotionality, and stronger. Like, I feel a lot more now than I used to. If I was to feel with the intensity that I feel now back when I started, it would have freaked me out, and I would have felt like I was having a breakdown. You know what I mean? It's like, because like, but that's like from an aspect of complex trauma. So there's different aspects going on here. But I'm just saying, like, you are sort of, I would suggest, like I said, use this as a tool with your therapists, with your social groups, with your meditation, with your exercise, with your good diet. Like, like use it as another pillar of mental health, as opposed to the only thing.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, because it can definitely open up a can of worms.
Can I read you a small poem? It's called Morning Song.
Yeah, sure.
A man played a song in my dreams last night. It was a eulogy. a homage to a life lost. It was a simple song, softly sung, but powerfully prosed. I woke weeping, mourning a man that I never knew, mourning a song that no longer exists.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. This has been good.
Yeah. If you found this conversation valuable, then it would be great if you could leave a review or share it with a friend so that more people can find this podcast. Thanks for listening.